I'm Rachel Mitchell, 29, sitting in my grandfather's lawyer's office surrounded by relatives who barely visited him when he was alive. My palms are sweaty as James Blackwell, Grandpa William's attorney for 30 years, adjusts his glasses and reads the next line of the will. To my beloved granddaughter Rachel, I leave $20 million. The room freezes. My parents' heads snap toward me, their expressions transforming from boredom to predatory interest in an instant. If only they knew what was coming. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button to join me for more shocking family revelations. Growing up in Boston, I never had the conventional family experience most children dream about. My parents, Kenneth and Diana Mitchell, were always more concerned with appearances and social status than with actual parenting. Our sprawling Victorian home in Beacon Hill impressed visitors, but inside those walls, warmth was scarce. The person who filled that void was my grandfather, William Mitchell. Grandpa built his fortune from nothing, starting with a small construction company in the 1960s that eventually grew into Mitchell Enterprises, a real estate development corporation worth hundreds of millions. Unlike my parents, he never flaunted his wealth. He wore the same Timex watch for 40 years and drove American-made cars until they wouldn't run anymore. Money is just a tool, Rachel, he would tell me during our Sunday afternoons together at the public garden. It's what you build with it that matters. While my parents jetted off to Monaco or Aspen or wherever the social elite gathered that season, Grandpa taught me to fish, to change a tire, and most importantly, to value people for their character rather than their bank accounts. He attended every school play, science fair, and graduation when my parents were unavoidably detained by some critical social engagement. I inherited his practical nature. After graduating from Boston University with a degree in environmental science and photography, I shocked my family by declining a cushy executive position at Mitchell Enterprises. Instead, I chose to become a wildlife photographer, documenting endangered species around the world for conservation organizations. "You're throwing away your potential," my father had yelled during one of our last major confrontations 3 years ago. "Do you have any idea what people would give to have your opportunities?" "I'm creating my own opportunities," I had responded calmly, which only infuriated him more. My mother was more subtle but equally disapproving. "Darling, it's wonderful you have these hobbies. But surely you can pursue them while maintaining a proper position in society." I moved out the next day into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Cambridge that I shared with my best friend Heather Cooper. We had met during freshman orientation and bonded over our shared love of photography and the outdoors. Unlike everyone else in my social circle, Heather never cared about my family name or connections. She judged me only on who I was. My lifestyle confused my status-obsessed relatives. I drove a reliable but unremarkable Subaru, wore clothes for comfort rather than designer labels, and spent my savings on camera equipment and conservation projects rather than jewelry or exotic vacations. The only luxury I allowed myself was an annual donation to the New England Wildlife Center, something Grandpa and I started doing together when I was 16. "Your parents think money is for showing off," Grandpa told me once. "They've never understood that true wealth is having enough to help others without worrying if there's enough left for yourself." Grandpa's health began declining last year. Cancer. The aggressive kind that doesn't respond well to treatment. I immediately put my international assignments on hold and moved into his guest room to help care for him during his final months. My parents visited occasionally, always with their attorney in tow, trying to discuss estate matters while Grandpa was still lucid. He would send them away, insisting there was time for such discussions later. "They've been circling like vultures for years," he confided in me one evening as we watched the sunset from his favorite armchair. "Your father has been borrowing against his inheritance for decades. Did you know that?" I hadn't known, but it explained my parents' increasingly lavish lifestyle despite my father's middling success at his investment firm. During those last months, Grandpa and I talked more openly than ever before. He told me stories about his youth, his struggles building his company, his deep love for my grandmother who had passed a decade earlier. Sometimes, in his more vulnerable moments, he expressed regret about my father. I gave him too much, too easily, he admitted. I thought I was showing love, but I was just enabling his worst instincts. I won't make that mistake with you, Rachel. At the time, I thought he was just reflecting on parenting decisions from long ago. I didn't realize he was leaving me clues about what he had planned. When Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep, I was holding his hand. My parents arrived 2 hours later, immediately asking for the key to his home office. The funeral last week was a spectacle that would have horrified Grandpa. My parents insisted on the most expensive casket, the most elaborate floral arrangements, and a reception at the Ritz-Carlton that felt more like a networking event than a memorial. I stood in the corner with Heather, watching relatives who had barely acknowledged Grandpa in life suddenly overcome with grief, or perhaps anticipation. "You doing okay?" Heather asked, handing me a glass of water. She knew I didn't drink alcohol at family functions. It was too important to keep my wits about me. "I'm just trying to get through this with some dignity intact," I replied, watching my cousin Marcus corner the family attorney. Marcus had always been my chief competitor for Grandpa's attention, though he sought it through extravagant displays of success rather than genuine connection. "Your grandfather would have hated this circus," Heather said. "Actually, he would have found it darkly amusing," I corrected her with a sad smile. "He always said you learn who people really are when money enters the picture." Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. The reading of the will was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the downtown offices of Blackwell and Associates. I arrived 15 minutes early with Heather as my moral support, finding the elegant reception area already half filled with relatives I typically only saw at Christmas parties and the occasional wedding. "Rachel, darling." My mother air-kissed near both my cheeks, her Chanel perfume overwhelming. She looked immaculate, as always, not a platinum blonde hair out of place despite her supposed grief. "We saved you a seat between us." "Thanks, but I'm fine here with Heather," I replied, choosing seats toward the back. My father didn't bother with pleasantries, merely nodding in my direction while continuing his hushed conversation with Uncle Robert, his older brother who had always resented Grandpa for giving my father a larger role in the family business despite being the younger son. The conference room we were eventually ushered into screamed old money with its mahogany table, leather chairs, and oil paintings of stern-looking men in suits, the founding partners of the firm. I recognized most of the family members present: Aunt Patricia, Uncle Robert's wife, who was fidgeting with her pearl necklace, my cousins Marcus and Lily, Great-Aunt Edith, Grandpa's only surviving sibling, who looked genuinely sorrowful, and a handful of more distant relatives who I suspected were equally distant from Grandpa's thoughts. James Blackwell entered last, carrying a leather portfolio. In his 70s now, he had been Grandpa's contemporary, friend, and legal advisor through decades of business deals and family matters. His silver hair and bow tie gave him the appearance of a distinguished professor rather than a corporate attorney. "Thank you all for coming today," he began formally. "Before we start the official proceedings, I want to express my personal condolences. William was not just my client, but a dear friend for over 40 years. My father cleared his throat impatiently. "We appreciate the sentiment, James, but perhaps we could proceed?" Blackwell's expression didn't change, but I noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "Of course, Kenneth. I understand you're eager to move forward." As Blackwell began with the legal preamble, my mind drifted back to my last private conversation with Grandpa, just 3 days before he passed. He had been having a good day, lucid and almost energetic. He'd asked the nurse to help him sit up in an armchair, and he'd requested that I bring him his old leather-bound journal. "Rachel," he'd said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "I want you to know I've made provisions. You won't have to worry." "Grandpa, I don't want to talk about the will," I'd protested. He had smiled, his eyes twinkling with their old mischief. "It's not just about money. It's about justice and consequences. Some people have been waiting a long time for a payday they haven't earned. What do you mean? You'll understand soon enough. He had patted my hand. Just remember that whatever happens, I've thought it through carefully. Trust James. He knows what to do. The memory dissolved as Blackwell began reading the actual bequests. As expected, there were numerous smaller gifts: 10,000 to his longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan, 20,000 to his gardener of 30 years, donations to his favorite charities, and small mementos to various friends. Great Aunt Edith received a modest but comfortable annuity to ensure her remaining years are free from financial concern. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense as the major assets remained unaddressed. My cousin Marcus kept glancing at his watch, while my father's leg bounced nervously under the table. I could feel my mother's gaze burning into me periodically, though I couldn't fathom why. Now, regarding Mitchell Enterprises, Blackwell continued, causing everyone to lean forward slightly. As you know, William maintained controlling interest in the company until his death. His shares are to be placed in a trust managed by the board of directors, with profits to be distributed as follows. The next several minutes outlined a complex arrangement that essentially kept the company intact while distributing modest dividends to various family members. My father received a seat on the board, but not the controlling interest he had clearly anticipated. I could see his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "This is irregular," Uncle Robert interrupted. "The company should pass directly to the family, not be controlled by the board." "These are William's explicit wishes," Blackwell replied firmly. "If you contest them, there are contingencies in place that would result in the immediate sale of the company to its employees through an ESOP. I strongly advise against challenging these terms." That silenced the room. Grandpa had outmaneuvered them all. Marcus leaned over to whisper something to my father, who shook his head sharply. The tension was building like a thunderstorm, and I had the distinct feeling the worst was yet to come. Blackwell continued through several more minor bequests, including Grandpa's beloved classic car collection going to a transportation museum and his art collection to various cultural institutions. With each announcement, my father's expression grew darker. The family vacation home in Maine went to Great Aunt Edith, while the ski lodge in Vermont was to be sold with proceeds going to conservation efforts. And the primary residence? My mother interrupted, unable to contain herself any longer. "The Beacon Hill home?" "I'm coming to that, Diana," Blackwell said with the patience of someone used to dealing with difficult clients. "But first, there's a matter William considered of paramount importance." He looked directly at me for the first time since beginning the reading. In that moment, I felt a chill of premonition. Something significant was about to happen, and somehow I was at the center of it. "To my beloved granddaughter, Rachel Elizabeth Mitchell," Blackwell read, his voice taking on a warmer tone, "I leave the sum of $20 million to be transferred immediately upon the reading of this will into trusts established in her name." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. $20 million. The amount was incomprehensible to me. I earned a good living as a photographer, but this was more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. The silence shattered as multiple voices erupted simultaneously. "This is outrageous," my father shouted, standing so abruptly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "There must be some mistake," my mother added, her perfectly composed facade cracking. Marcus let loose a string of profanities that caused Great Aunt Edith to gasp. Through the chaos, I remained frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. Heather squeezed my hand under the table, grounding me. Blackwell raised his hands for quiet. "There's more." When the noise subsided slightly, he continued, "This bequest comes with a personal message from William." He produced an envelope and handed it to me. With trembling fingers, I opened it and unfolded the letter inside, immediately recognizing Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Rachel," I read silently as the room watched. If you're reading this, I've moved on to the next adventure. Don't grieve too much. I've had a good run. The money I've left you represents not just my love for you, but my absolute trust in your judgment and character. Unlike others who have viewed my wealth as their birthright, you've always worked for what you wanted and valued people over possessions. You might be wondering why such a large sum. The answer is simple. You're the only one I trust to use it wisely. I've watched you grow into a woman of principle and compassion. Your work documenting and protecting endangered species has made me prouder than any business deal I ever closed. Some family members will be upset by my decision. Let them be. Their reactions will only confirm what I already know about their character. James has documentation that will explain more, but suffice it to say that certain individuals have already taken far more than their fair share from me during my lifetime. Use this money to pursue your dreams, Rachel. Establish that wildlife foundation you've talked about. Travel. Learn. Grow. Just promise me you'll never let wealth change who you are at heart. With eternal love and confidence. Grandpa. I looked up, tears blurring my vision, to find my parents had moved to stand directly across from me. Their expressions had transformed completely, the anger replaced with unconvincing smiles. Rachel, sweetheart, my mother began in her most solicitous tone. What a wonderful surprise. Your grandfather was always so fond of you. My father nodded vigorously. We should discuss investment strategies immediately. I have several opportunities that... Kenneth, Diana. Blackwell interrupted. There's more to the will that concerns you directly. They reluctantly returned to their seats, though my mother took the chair next to mine, patting my arm in a gesture of forced affection that made my skin crawl. To my son Kenneth and his wife Diana, Blackwell continued reading, I leave the sum of $100,000 with the strong suggestion it be used to pay off your outstanding debts, which are considerable. My father's face flushed crimson. This is absurd. A pittance after all I've done for the company. Blackwell ignored the outburst. Additionally, Kenneth and Diana are hereby required to vacate the Beacon Hill residence, which they have been occupying rent-free, within 30 days. The property itself will be placed in trust with provisions to be disclosed separately. My mother's hand froze on my arm. But where are we supposed to go? That's our home. It was never your home, Diana, Blackwell corrected gently. It always remained in William's name. He allowed you to live there as a courtesy. The reading continued with several more bequests, but I hardly heard them. My mind was reeling from the implications. Not only had Grandpa left me a fortune, but he had effectively cut my parents off. The modest $100,000 wouldn't begin to cover their debts if they were as extensive as Grandpa had implied. As the formal reading concluded and family members began filing out, some stopping to congratulate me with transparent insincerity, others too angry to acknowledge me at all, Blackwell asked me to remain behind for a private word. Your parents as well, please, he added when they tried to usher me out. Once the room had cleared except for the four of us and Heather, who I insisted stay, Blackwell opened a different folder. William asked me to share this information privately, he explained, sliding several documents across the table. These are records of loans made to Kenneth and Diana over the past 15 years, totaling nearly $8 million. None have been repaid. My father didn't even attempt to deny it. Those were advances against my inheritance, not loans. They were formally documented as loans, Blackwell corrected, with interest terms that have also not been met. We're family, my mother protested. William understood our position. We have a certain standard to maintain, Blackwell continued as if she hadn't spoken. Additionally, there's the matter of the unauthorized withdrawals from several Mitchell Enterprises accounts under Kenneth's management. The forensic accounting report is quite detailed. My father blanched. Those were legitimate business expenses. The vacation home in the Maldives? The yacht? The gambling debts in Monaco? Blackwell raised an eyebrow. William chose not to pursue criminal charges during his lifetime out of concern for family reputation, but he was fully aware of these activities. I felt physically ill. The father who had lectured me about responsibility and proper use of family resources had been stealing from his own father all along. This is why Rachel received the bulk of the liquid assets, Blackwell concluded. William no longer trusted you with significant sums, Kenneth. This is ridiculous, my father snapped, turning to me. Rachel, you can't possibly need $20 million. As your parents, we expect you to do the right thing here. The right thing, I echoed, finding my voice at last. Family supports family, my mother interjected smoothly. Your grandfather was clearly not in his right mind toward the end. We can contest the will, create a scandal, or we can handle this privately. As a family, what exactly are you asking for? I questioned, already knowing the answer. We'll need at least $10 million to cover our obligations and maintain our lifestyle, my father stated as if discussing the weather. It's only fair. I looked at them, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time. These people who had prioritized social standing over parenting, who had missed my college graduation for a yacht party, who had criticized every choice I'd made that didn't align with their materialistic values, were now demanding I bail them out of problems entirely of their own making. No, I said simply. What did you say? My father's voice dropped dangerously. I said no. I won't be giving you any money. Blackwell cleared his throat. Before this discussion continues, William asked me to provide Rachel with this. He produced a check, an actual paper check made out to me for $20 million. He thought you might want something tangible to mark the occasion, though the funds have already been transferred electronically. I took the check, staring at the incredible figure written there. This discussion isn't over, my father warned as Blackwell escorted us all out. We'll continue at home. Not your home anymore, I reminded him quietly, the check still clutched in my hand. Despite my better judgment, I agreed to meet my parents at Grandpa's mansion later that afternoon. Heather offered to come with me, but this was a confrontation I needed to handle alone. Just keep your phone on, she advised. And call me if things get weird. Define weird. When it comes to my family, I joked weakly. The house where I'd spent so many happy hours with Grandpa now felt tainted by my parents' presence. They were waiting in his study, my father pacing by the windows overlooking the garden, my mother perched on the leather sofa, her posture rigid with tension. Rachel, my father began without preamble, you need to understand our position. Everything we've done has been for this family's legacy. What legacy would that be? I asked, remaining standing near the door. The legacy of living beyond your means? Of taking advantage of Grandpa's generosity? Of embezzlement? Don't be dramatic, my mother cut in. Your grandfather indulged you because you were his pet project. The artistic granddaughter with her cameras and causes. It was charming to him. But running this family requires more than charity work and wildlife photos. And what exactly have you contributed to the family, Mother? Besides spending its money? My father slammed his hand on Grandpa's desk. Enough. We are your parents. We gave you everything, the best schools, connections, opportunities. Grandpa gave me those things, I corrected. When he wasn't busy covering for your mistakes. You ungrateful little, he caught himself, visibly trying to regain control. Look, your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly at the end. Cancer, medications, his judgment was compromised. Funny how you never questioned his judgment when he was bailing you out of your financial disasters. My mother changed tactics, her voice softening. Darling, we understand you're grieving. We all are. But think about what this money could mean for all of us. We could settle our temporary financial difficulties, renovate the vacation properties, ensure the family name remains respected in the right circles. You mean you could keep pretending to be wealthier than you are while contributing nothing of value to anyone? You little ingrate. My father abandoned all pretense of civility. After everything we've sacrificed for you. What exactly have you sacrificed? I demanded. From where I'm standing, Grandpa was the one making all the sacrifices while you two took advantage of him. He was my father. That money should have come to me directly. He was shouting now, his face contorted with rage. Not funneled through my daughter like some kind of sick power play from beyond the grave. Maybe he knew you couldn't be trusted with it, I suggested quietly. My mother rose, approaching me with calculation in her eyes. Rachel, be reasonable. We're talking about your future too. Without our guidance, you'll make mistakes. You don't understand how the world of wealth works. I understand enough to know that $20 million doesn't disappear unless someone is catastrophically irresponsible with it. Like you two have been with everything Grandpa ever gave you. My father made a visible effort to calm himself, adjusting his tie. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer $10 million to our accounts. We'll handle the family obligations, settle our debts, and everyone can move forward without scandal or legal battles. And if I refuse? Then we can test the will, my mother stated. Claim undue influence, diminished capacity on William's part. It would be messy, public. Your grandfather's private financial decisions dragged through probate court. His mental state questioned. Is that what you want for his legacy? I felt a chill at their willingness to desecrate Grandpa's memory for money. Blackwell seems confident the will is ironclad. Blackwell isn't infallible, my father sneered. And neither was my father. We'll tie that money up in litigation for years. You won't see a penny while the lawyers fight it out. The threat hung in the air. I realized with perfect clarity that they would do exactly that, not because they believed they could win, but out of pure vindictiveness. Fine, I said at last. Let me think about it. Relief visibly washed over them. They thought they'd won. That's our sensible girl, my mother smiled, reaching to pat my cheek. I stepped back. I said I'll think about it. I didn't agree to anything. The check, my father said suddenly. Where is it? In my purse, I replied, gesturing to the bag I'd set on a side table. He moved with surprising speed for a man in his 60s, snatching my purse before I could react. What are you doing? I demanded, trying to grab it back. Ensuring you make the right decision, he growled, dumping the contents onto Grandpa's desk and sifting through them until he found the check. Give that back. I lunged for it, but my mother stepped between us. This is for your own good, Rachel, she insisted. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have, I shot back, trying to push past her. What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to process it. My father held up the check triumphantly, and my mother produced a silver lighter from her pocket, the antique one she always carried, a gift from some European aristocrat she'd cultivated as a social connection. One last chance, my father warned, holding the check just above my reach. Agree to our terms, or this symbolic gesture of your grandfather's becomes exactly that, just a symbol. You can't be serious, I breathed, realizing they were. That check is made out to me. It's my property. Not anymore, my mother said coldly, flicking the lighter to produce a flame. My father dangled the check over the fire. 10 million. That's our offer. I told you, the money's already been transferred, I reminded them desperately. Burning that check won't change anything. Then why do you care so much? My father's eyes narrowed. No, I think this matters more than you're admitting. Maybe Blackwell was bluffing about the electronic transfer. Maybe this check is the only way you can access those funds. You're being ridiculous. But he wasn't listening. With a nod to my mother, he lowered the check to the flame. I watched in disbelief as the paper caught fire, curling and blackening at the edges. No! I cried out of instinct, reaching for it, but they blocked me. The check burned quickly, reduced to ash in my father's palm, which he then brushed off contemptuously onto Grandpa's antique desk. Now you'll never see a cent, he declared with savage satisfaction. It's ours now. We'll go to Blackwell tomorrow, explain that you've agreed the distribution was unfair. With the check destroyed, he'll have to reissue the funds properly. The absurdity of the situation suddenly struck me, and before I could stop myself, I began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle but quickly grew into full-blown, uncontrollable laughter that bent me double. My parents exchanged concerned glances. She's hysterical, my mother diagnosed, reaching for her phone. I'm calling Dr. Winters. No, I gasped between fits of laughter. I'm not hysterical. I'm just amazed at how completely you've misunderstood everything. What's so funny? My father demanded, his triumph giving way to uncertainty. I managed to control my laughter enough to speak. That check you just burned? It was ceremonial. The money is already in trusts in my name. Blackwell set everything up weeks ago. Their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. You're lying, my mother accused, but her voice lacked conviction. Call Blackwell if you don't believe me, I suggested, pulling out my phone. I have him on speed dial. Or better yet. I tapped the screen a few times and held it up to show them. I just logged into one of the trust accounts. See for yourself. They both leaned forward, staring at the balance displayed on my phone screen. $10 million, just in this one account. That's not possible, my father stammered. Grandpa knew you better than you thought, I told them quietly. He anticipated exactly what you might try to do. That's why the check was just for show. A test, maybe, to see what you would do when faced with temptation. A test we failed, my mother whispered, sinking back onto the sofa. Spectacularly, I agreed. My father's face contorted with rage. This isn't over. We can still contest the will. Claim fraud, manipulation. The study door opened, and James Blackwell entered, followed by 2 uniformed security officers. Actually, Kenneth, it is over, he announced calmly. I received an alert when Rachel's check was destroyed. We had it coded with an RFID chip for exactly this scenario. You were spying on us? My mother gasped. Protecting my client's interests, Blackwell corrected. William anticipated you might resort to desperate measures. He turned to the security officers. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell from the premises. They are no longer welcome here. This is outrageous, my father exploded. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. I'll have your license revoked. Blackwell remained unruffled. You're welcome to try, Kenneth. But before you do, you might want to consider that I have documented evidence of your embezzlement from Mitchell Enterprises. Evidence that, until now, has not been shared with the board of directors or the authorities. My father blanched. You wouldn't. Continue pursuing this, and I most certainly would, Blackwell assured him. William chose not to press charges during his lifetime out of consideration for Rachel. I have no such constraints. My mother rose shakily to her feet. This house is still ours. You can't just throw us out. Actually, I can, I said, finding a newfound confidence. As of this morning, I am the legal owner of this property. What? They both turned to me in shock. Another provision of the will, Blackwell explained. The Beacon Hill property was placed in trust with Rachel as the sole beneficiary. The trust activated immediately upon William's death, though you were granted a 30-day grace period to vacate. A period I'm now terminating based on your actions today. You can't do this to us, my mother pleaded, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. Where will we go? For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for them. Not enough to change my mind, but enough to soften my tone. You have the $100,000 Grandpa left you. It's enough for a decent apartment while you figure things out. $100,000? My father looked physically ill. That won't even cover the interest on our debts. Then perhaps it's time to live within your means, I suggested. The security officers moved forward, making it clear this discussion was over. My parents had no choice but to leave, though my father couldn't resist one parting shot. This isn't the end, Rachel. Family doesn't do this to family. No, I agreed. Family doesn't burn checks, threaten lawsuits, or steal from each other. You taught me exactly what family isn't supposed to be. After they were escorted out, Blackwell stayed behind. Your grandfather would be proud of how you handled that, he told me. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Did he really anticipate they would try to destroy the check? Blackwell smiled sadly. William knew his son better than Kenneth ever realized. The RFID chip was his idea. People show you who they really are when they think they have nothing to lose, he told me. I looked around the study, filled with memories of Grandpa. What do I do now, James? $20 million is overwhelming. Take some time, he advised. There's no rush to make decisions. The trusts are structured to protect the principal while providing you with a generous income. You can focus on your photography, travel, or whatever else brings you joy. An idea began forming in my mind. The first thing I want to do is buy this house. Officially, I mean. No trusts or legal arrangements. I want it in my name. That can be arranged easily. May I ask why? I ran my hand along Grandpa's desk, where he'd taught me to play chess when I was 8. Because it should stay in the family. The real family, people who loved Grandpa for who he was, not what he could give them. Blackwell nodded approvingly. I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. As he prepared to leave, he handed me a small key. One more thing William wanted you to have. His private safe in the library contains documents he thought you should see. Personal journals, family history, things he felt might help you understand why he made the choices he did. After Blackwell left, I stood alone in Grandpa's study, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of freedom. For the first time in my life, I was truly independent, financially and emotionally. No more family obligations based on guilt or manipulation. No more criticism of my career choices or lifestyle. I called Heather to update her on what had happened. Holy crap, she breathed when I finished the story. They actually burned the check? That's straight out of a movie. Reality is stranger than fiction sometimes, I replied, finding myself able to laugh about it now. The look on their faces when Blackwell showed up with security. So what now, millionaire? Private jet to Paris? Mansion in Malibu. Actually, I'm thinking of staying right here. This house, it's more than just a valuable property. It's where Grandpa and I connected. Where he taught me what really matters. That's my Rachel, Heather said warmly. Given life-changing money and your first thought is sentimental value. Well, that and the Wildlife Conservation Foundation Grandpa and I used to talk about starting. I think it's time to make that dream a reality. He would have loved that, Heather agreed. Want me to bring over some takeout to celebrate your first night as Lady of the Manor? Absolutely. And Heather, thank you for being there today. For being the family I got to choose. After hanging up, I wandered through the house that was now mine, seeing it through new eyes. Not as a symbol of wealth or status, but as a home with history and meaning. A place where I could honor Grandpa's legacy while building my own. The thought filled me with a sense of purpose stronger than any I'd felt before. This wasn't just about money. It was about using resources wisely, just as Grandpa had taught me. About creating something meaningful that would outlast me, just as he had done. And perhaps most importantly, it was about breaking the cycle of entitlement and materialism that had poisoned my parents' lives. About proving that the Mitchell name could stand for something better than what they had made of it. With that resolution firm in my mind, I headed to the library to discover what final lessons Grandpa had left for me in his private safe. 1 month passed in a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and adjustments to my new reality. The first week alone included consultations with financial advisors, attorneys, and tax specialists, all orchestrated by Blackwell to ensure I understood my options and responsibilities. The goal isn't just to preserve the capital, explained Marion Foster, the financial advisor Blackwell recommended. It's to grow it responsibly while allowing you to pursue your priorities. I learned more about investment strategies, charitable foundations, and tax implications in those first few weeks than I had in my entire life. But unlike my parents, who had treated money as something to display and consume, I approached it as a tool, just as Grandpa had taught me. Most people who suddenly come into wealth make the mistake of changing everything at once, Marion cautioned during one of our sessions. I encourage you to make changes gradually. I took her advice to heart. While I officially owned Grandpa's mansion, I maintained my modest apartment in Cambridge, using the house primarily for foundation business and gradually refurbishing it to reflect my own style rather than my parents' ostentatious tastes. The William Mitchell Wildlife Conservation Foundation became my primary focus. I hired Heather as the foundation's first employee. She had a background in nonprofit management before pursuing photography, and together we outlined our mission, documenting endangered species and funding conservation efforts, with a special focus on New England's threatened ecosystems. "Your grandfather would be thrilled," Blackwell commented when I showed him the foundation's mission statement. "He always said your photography had purpose beyond just creating beautiful images." My parents, meanwhile, had moved into a luxury apartment in Back Bay, still beyond their means, but less extravagant than the mansion. They made several attempts to reconnect, each more transparent than the last. "Darling, we've had time to reflect," my mother cooed during an unexpected visit to my apartment. "Family disagreements happen, but blood is thicker than water." "What do you want, Mother?" I asked directly. She didn't even bother with further pretense. "The Bergman Charity Gala is next month. We need to make an appropriate donation to maintain our standing, but with our temporary cash flow issues." "No," I said simply, closing the door on her shocked expression. My father tried a different approach, sending a formal business proposal for an investment opportunity that promised guaranteed returns of at least 30%. A quick analysis by my financial team revealed it as little more than a desperate attempt to access my funds for his own purposes. Their most public effort came in the form of interviews with Boston's social columnists, portraying themselves as victims of undue influence by Grandpa's attorney. These stories gained little traction but did succeed in alienating them further from Boston's old money circles, who valued discretion above all else. Not all family connections proved toxic, however. My cousin Lily, Uncle Robert's daughter, who had always been kind but distant, reached out with what seemed like genuine interest in reconnecting. "I always admired how you stood your ground with the family," she confessed over coffee at a neutral cafe she had suggested. "I just never had the courage to do the same." "It wasn't courage so much as stubbornness," I admitted. "And having Grandpa in my corner helped." "Uncle William saw something in you worth nurturing," she observed. The rest of us were too busy competing for status to recognize what really mattered to him. Our conversation revealed that Lily had been quietly pursuing a degree in environmental science, hiding her passion from her status-conscious parents. Finding this common ground led to her becoming the foundation's second hire, specializing in habitat restoration projects. Through Grandpa's personal journals, which I discovered in his safe, I gained new insight into the family dynamics that had shaped us all. He wrote candidly about his regrets in raising my father, acknowledging that his own workaholic tendencies during my father's formative years had created a distance between them. "I tried to bridge that gap with money," he wrote in one particularly poignant entry, only to discover too late that material compensation only widened the emotional chasm. "I won't make the same mistake with Rachel." The journals also revealed his growing awareness of my parents' financial misdeeds, documenting his internal struggle between protecting family and enabling destructive behavior. "Kenneth took another unauthorized loan today," read an entry from 5 years earlier. "He thinks I don't notice. Perhaps I've failed him more thoroughly than I realized if he believes I'm either too blind to see or too weak to act." These glimpses into Grandpa's private thoughts helped me understand his decisions and strengthened my resolve to honor his legacy thoughtfully. For months after the will reading, I found myself hosting a small gathering at the mansion, now officially my home, though I'd taken to calling it Mitchell House rather than the mansion in a subtle but important shift of perspective. The occasion was a planning meeting for the Foundation's first major conservation initiative, but it had evolved into a casual dinner with the core team. Heather and Lily were there, along with Dr. Jason Bennett, a conservation biologist from MIT whom we'd recruited as a scientific advisor. Jason had initially approached the Foundation with professional detachment, but our shared passion for wildlife preservation quickly formed the basis for something deeper. "I expected the usual wealthy dilettante playing at environmentalism," he confessed to me one evening as we reviewed camera trap footage of the elusive New England cottontail. "I've never been happier to be completely wrong." Unlike others who had suddenly taken interest in me following news of my inheritance, Jason seemed utterly indifferent to my financial status. He drove a 10-year-old Prius, lived in a modest faculty apartment, and routinely forgot to cash his consulting checks from the foundation. Money is just potential energy, he told me during one of our early debates about conservation strategies. It only matters when converted into kinetic energy, actual change in the world. It was exactly the kind of thing Grandpa would have said, and the parallel wasn't lost on me. As our professional relationship gradually evolved into friendship and then something more, I found myself approaching this new relationship with the same careful deliberation I applied to foundation decisions. My newly acquired wealth had made me more cautious, not less, about people's motives. "You can relax, you know," Heather teased after observing one of my conversations with Jason. "The man is clearly interested in you, not your bank account." He turned down that research grant from Stanford to stay involved with our little foundation. "Our foundation isn't exactly little anymore," I deflected, though her point registered. Indeed, the William Mitchell Wildlife Conservation Foundation had grown rapidly in its first months. Our initial land acquisition, 500 acres of critical habitat in western Massachusetts, had generated positive press and attracted additional donors and partners. We were already in discussions about expanding our conservation corridor along the Connecticut River watershed. Through it all, I maintained my own photography work, though now I could be more selective about assignments, focusing on projects that aligned with the Foundation's mission. My first major exhibition under the Foundation's banner, Unseen New England, documented rare species fighting for survival in our region's remaining wild spaces. At the opening night, standing beside large-format prints of lynx, timber rattlesnakes, and yes, New England cottontails, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. He would have loved seeing his resources directed toward creating this kind of impact, tangible, meaningful protection for the natural world we both cherished. "Your grandfather would be proud," Blackwell murmured, appearing beside me as I greeted guests. "Not just of the Foundation, but of how you've handled everything." "I hope so," I replied, watching as Jason enthusiastically explained the ecological importance of vernal pools to a group of potential donors. "I'm trying to make decisions he would approve of." "William didn't want you to live your life seeking his approval," Blackwell corrected gently. "He wanted you to live according to your own values he helped nurture, but never sought to control." His words stayed with me long after the exhibition closed. Was I making choices based on what I truly believed, or was I still seeking Grandpa's posthumous validation? It was a question I continued to wrestle with as the Foundation grew and my personal life evolved. When my parents made one final attempt at reconciliation, this time through the family attorney rather than directly, I found myself at a crossroads. The letter proposed a fresh start contingent upon financial support for their transitional period, a transparent euphemism for another bailout. For days, I debated my response. What would Grandpa want me to do? What did I want to do? Were those the same thing, and did they need to be? The answer came to me while reviewing Grandpa's journals one evening, specifically an entry from shortly before his diagnosis. "The greatest gift we can give those we love is not protection from consequences," he had written, but faith in their capacity to learn from them. I sent a brief reply the next morning, declining any financial assistance, but offering something more valuable: honesty. I detailed exactly how their actions had affected me throughout my life, and expressed hope that they might someday prioritize relationship over resources. They never responded, but I felt lighter having sent it, free from both obligation and resentment. For the first time, I was relating to them as an adult with boundaries rather than a child seeking approval or a victim nursing wounds. That shift marked a turning point in my personal growth, one that rippled through all my relationships and decisions. I began trusting my own judgment more, consulting Grandpa's journals less, and embracing the future rather than preserving the past. The William Mitchell Wildlife Conservation Foundation was no longer just Grandpa's dream that I was fulfilling. It was becoming my own vision, shaped by my experiences and values. The mansion was evolving from a memorial to a living, working headquarters for conservation innovation. And most importantly, I was evolving from William Mitchell's granddaughter into simply Rachel Mitchell, a woman defined not by her inheritance or family name, but by the choices she made and the impact she created. 1 year after Grandpa's will reading changed my life forever, I stood at the podium overlooking what was once his favorite fishing spot, now the centerpiece of the William Mitchell Wildlife Sanctuary. Behind me, a simple stone building housed our research center and visitor facilities. Before me stretched 3,000 acres of protected forest, wetlands, and meadows home to dozens of threatened species and open to the public for educational visits. Today, we're not just opening a nature sanctuary, I told the assembled crowd of conservation partners, local officials, and press. We're continuing a legacy of stewardship that my grandfather believed in deeply. William Mitchell understood that true wealth isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we protect and preserve for future generations. The journey to this moment had been transformative in ways I never could have imagined when I first sat in Blackwell's office, shocked by the inheritance that had sparked such chaos. The foundation now employed 15 people full-time, had protected over 5,000 acres across New England, and had established educational programs in partnership with schools throughout the region. But the professional accomplishments paled beside the personal growth. I was no longer defined by my relationship to Grandpa or my opposition to my parents. I had become my own person, making decisions based on my values rather than reactions to family dynamics. As guests mingled after the ceremony, my cousin Lily approached with champagne flutes. To Uncle William, she proposed, raising her glass. And to you, Rachel. I don't think any of us realized how much the family needed someone to break the cycle. Break the cycle? Of using money as a substitute for actual connection, she explained. Of measuring worth by wealth rather than character. You know Marcus has started volunteering at a youth center? Says he was inspired by what you've done with the foundation. This was news to me. Marcus, who had been one of my most vocal critics after the will reading, had apparently undergone his own transformation. People can surprise you, I acknowledged. Speaking of surprises, Lily nodded toward the edge of the gathering, where my parents stood awkwardly, clearly unsure of their welcome. I hadn't invited them, but I wasn't entirely shocked to see them either. The sanctuary opening had received significant local press. Excuse me, I said to Lily, making my way toward them with mixed emotions. My mother spotted me first, nervously smoothing her considerably less expensive dress than she would have worn a year ago. My father stood stiffly beside her, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. Rachel, my mother began uncertainly. It's a beautiful ceremony. Your grandfather would have loved it. Thank you, I replied, maintaining a polite distance. What brings you here? My father cleared his throat. I wanted to see what you've created. It's impressive. Coming from him, this qualified as effusive praise. I studied their faces, looking for signs of an ulterior motive, but finding only awkward sincerity. How have you been? I asked, genuinely curious. Managing, my father answered with surprising candor. I've taken a position teaching business classes at a community college. The pay isn't what I'm used to, but... He trailed off, seemingly embarrassed. But it's honest work, my mother finished for him. We've downsized considerably. It's been educational. I nodded, unsure how to respond to this version of my parents, humbled, working for a living, apparently attempting genuine connection without financial agenda. Would you like a tour of the sanctuary? I offered impulsively. The trails are open to visitors. We'd like that, my mother said quickly, before my father could respond. If you have time. I can make time, I replied, surprising myself with the realization that I meant it. I didn't harbor illusions that one civil conversation signaled complete reformation or that we would ever have the close relationship I'd wished for as a child. But perhaps we could build something new, something based on reality rather than expectations or obligations. As I led them toward the trailhead, Jason fell into step beside me, offering silent support. Over the past year, our relationship had deepened into something I treasured, a partnership of equals based on shared values and genuine affection rather than social advantage or financial interest. "You okay?" he murmured as my parents walked ahead, admiring the sanctuary. "I am," I realized aloud. "They can't hurt me anymore. Not because I'm rich or powerful, but because I know who I am now." He squeezed my hand. "You always knew. You just needed to believe it." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the sanctuary had quieted except for the chorus of spring peepers around the pond, I returned to Grandpa's, now my favorite spot. The wooden bench overlooking the water had been one of the first things I'd insisted on preserving when developing the property. Sitting there in the gathering dusk, I pulled out Grandpa's journal, the last one he'd kept before his illness. I turned to an entry I'd read countless times over the past year, finding comfort in his words as I navigated my new reality. True wealth, he had written, is measured not in dollars, but in freedom. Freedom to make choices based on principle rather than necessity. Freedom to help others without expecting return. Freedom to become the person you're meant to be rather than the person others expect. This is the inheritance I hope to leave Rachel, not just financial security, but the courage to live authentically in a world that constantly pressures us to compromise. I closed the journal, watching fireflies begin their evening dance over the water. In the end, Grandpa had given me exactly what he intended, not just money, but perspective. The ability to see wealth as a responsibility rather than a privilege. The wisdom to recognize that relationships based on genuine connection were the true measure of a rich life. The $20 million had changed my circumstances dramatically, but the real transformation had come from within, from choices I'd made about how to use those resources, who to trust, what to prioritize. My phone buzzed with a text from Heather, checking in after the day's events. "Foundation's first year equals massive success. Proud of you, boss lady. Celebration brunch tomorrow." I smiled, typing back my agreement. This was the wealth that mattered most, friends who had been there before the money and stayed true after. Purpose that gave meaning beyond material comfort. The freedom to define success on my own terms. As twilight deepened into night, I made my way back toward the research center, where lights still glowed as our team analyzed the day's wildlife monitoring data. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conservation opportunities, new chances to honor Grandpa's legacy while creating my own. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been right. And in the end, that made all the difference. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? What do you think defines true wealth? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics and finding your authentic path. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, and remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's in the bank account, but the wisdom to use it wisely.